I started this channel because of shimmer ink, so it's clear that I'm a fan. I have plenty of different colors, arguably too many. I've got the ink that started the craze, J. Herbin Rouge Hematite, which was conservative in the amount of flakes in the bottle. And that's what I'll refer to shimmer particles from here on out as flakes. I've got this bright gold with tiny flakes that's also extremely well behaved and will live forever in my Pelican M400 tortoise shell. I've even got a bottle of Lamy Mango that isn't supposed to be a shimmer ink, but somehow mine is. And I've got this ink, Diatramentis Heliogen Green Copper, which contrasts a cool-toned ink with a warm shimmer, not unlike the Blue Barrel Tonic I highlighted in my first video. But what I want to talk about today is making my own shimmer ink. That sounds kind of dramatic since all I'm doing is adding shimmer flakes to an ink and shaking it around, but I make my own martinis, and that's just gin with some vermouth. Let's start with the shimmer. I've got some Pearl X powders intended to be used by calligraphers using dip pens. Amazon affiliate link in the description if you want some yourself. Calligraphers, it should be said, are much more comfortable using whatever fluids happen to be around, since dip nibs don't clog and are cheap to replace, since they only cost like $1 or $2 usually. And now let's talk about what ink we're going to make. I have one in particular that I want to try to duplicate, and that's Ancient Song Winter October, which I first saw on Mountain of Ink Review 335. It seems like Robert Oster Tranquility or Aqua would be a good match, but I don't have either of those inks, so instead I'm going to use Organic Studios Walden Blue. And for the shimmer, I'll use the brightest gold I have, which was the last one that you saw. I don't know exactly how much shimmer to add, so I'm going to take a look at some of my shimmer inks that I purchased commercially and get a rough idea of how much they add. I'm going to start kind of conservative anyway, but at least I have a starting point. I've only got one sample of this Walden ink. I'm going to do 2 batches. One I'm going to leave full strength, and the other I'm going to dilute about 20% with distilled water. And I'm going to add the water first because, as they say, do as you oughta, acid to water. I'm going to take about 2 milliliters of ink out of this 4 milliliter sample and put it in here now. I just need to say that this ink is incredibly thick and incredibly saturated. You may see later in the video that glass of what is now clear water. Just the remnants of what's in that pipette turn that water bluer than Windex. And now I'm going to add the mica powder to the ink. You'll be able to see how much I add to the 2 milliliters. It's just the very tip of the scoop is all that I add. Now, you'll see later in the video that this ends up being not enough powder, so for 2 milliliters, you want to add twice that amount. Now just give it a good shake and we're ready to see what we've made. I'm going to start with the diluted vial, and this ink is really thick. It's difficult to write with. Enough so that there's not really any point in testing the non-diluted vial. But I think you can see that I get sheen and a little bit of shimmer even on this Kokuyo Campus paper, which is my go-to paper for note-taking. It's very nice, but it doesn't typically show a tremendous amount of sheen, especially. So I'll give it a shot on the standard Tomoe River paper. I've diluted it slightly here, so it's a bit easier to write with. But it's still not easy, so off camera I diluted it yet again. And now it's much more pleasant to use. I also doubled the amount of mica, like I alluded to earlier. This next sample is that same amount of mica in Robert Oster Fire and Ice. It worked fine, but it's not the color that I'm looking for. Okay, so my mixture works in a dip pen. Let's try it in a fountain pen. I'm using a Twisby swipe here with a medium nib. I'm going to have to use a blunt syringe to fill the pen since I can't fit the pen into a sample bottle. And when you fill a dry pen with a syringe, it can be difficult to get the pen to write since there's no ink on the nib and feed, so there's no capillary action to pull the ink down and onto the paper. One reason I picked this pen it was because the spring converter is easy to actuate and push the ink down onto the nib. It's also an easy pen to clean out in case this is all a horrible mistake and I've made a cloggy mess. And we're off to really not a great start. At this point, when I was filming, I was wondering if this video was ever going to see the light of day, whether or not this was even going to work, whether the ink that I'd made was an absolute mess, and whether I'd wasted several hours of my weekend taking video that was just going to sit on my hard drive forever. But after some fiddling, including a little bit off camera, I got it writing. And once I got the pen flowing like this, it was fine. There were several days between filming this and recording the voiceover you're listening to, and I used the pen in the interim. I picked it up, gave it a quick shake, and it started writing just fine. Worked without any problems. So even though it was hard to get started, that had more to do with using the syringe and having an unprimed nib rather than any problem with the ink itself. Now let's do some close-ups. Quick reminder that the ring light causes exaggerated sheen. First up is the first version of Winter October, then the second version that's a bit more dilute and has more shimmer. As a point of comparison, I've got some store-bought inks. Diamine Arctic Blue, then Ferris Wheel Press Twinkling Tea Party, then Pelican Golden Barrel, and finally Deatramentis Heliogen Green Copper. Now for the super close-ups. At this point, I'm looking at the size and shape of the flakes we added compared to those in the commercial offerings. Looking around, I'm not seeing a big difference. There's a lot of shimmer in the green copper, way more than I added. And that's kind of to be expected because that ink, more than any other ink that I have, is troublesome in pens. But it's absolutely worth it because it is just such a really pretty ink. And finally, let's take a close look at the longer writing sample. Honestly, I think we got pretty close. I played it pretty safe this time with my color selection. I picked something that I knew would work. Next time, though, I'm getting wild and free, and it's going to be as energetic and colorful as these models in this stock footage. Join me next week, where there's not a guarantee of success. And until then, thanks for watching.